The acrid smoke of burning foreign buildings drifted across the ancient cobblestones of Peking as Captain John Twiggs Myers of the United States Marine Corps pressed his eye to the cracked window of the besieged American legation. Through the haze, he could see the red banners of the Boxers fluttering in the summer heat of June 20th, 1900. The sounds of war drums echoed across the Forbidden City, while thousands of Chinese militants surrounded the foreign quarter. There were cries promising death to all foreign devils. The siege had begun in earnest when Chinese soldiers joined forces with the Boxers on June 20th, trapping over 3,000 foreigners and Chinese Christians in the diplomatic quarter for what would become a 55-day ordeal. Myers knew that beyond these walls, the situation had deteriorated beyond anyone's worst nightmares. Private Daniel Joseph Daly, barely 27 years old, checked his Springfield rifle for the 100th time that morning. The young Marine from Glen Cove, New York, had volunteered for duty in China expecting routine guard duty at the American legation. Instead, he found himself preparing to defend Western civilization itself against an enemy that seemed to emerge from the very stones of ancient China. The Boxers, members of the secret society known as the Righteous and Harmonious Fists, believed their martial arts and mystical rituals made them invulnerable to foreign bullets. The international compound housed diplomats, missionaries, and civilians from 8 different nations, each clinging to their own section of what had become a fortress of desperation. American Marines stood shoulder to shoulder with British soldiers, Russian Cossacks, and Japanese infantry. Captain Myers commanded 56 American Marines and sailors, a pitifully small force considering the thousands of enemies gathering outside their perimeter. As night fell over the besieged legations, the first major assault began. Boxer militants, adorned with red sashes and carrying ancient swords alongside modern rifles, charged the American section of the defensive line. Their battle cry of "Shah, Shah" echoed through the darkness as they believed their magical invincibility would protect them from foreign weapons. The reality proved far different as disciplined volleys from Myers' Marines cut down wave after wave of attackers. The situation grew more desperate with each passing hour. Food supplies dwindled while ammunition ran critically low. The defenders had to make every shot count, and Myers found himself rationing bullets like precious gems. The international telegraph lines had been cut days earlier, leaving the besieged compound completely isolated from the outside world. None of the defenders knew if relief forces were even being organized, or if the great powers had simply written off their trapped citizens as acceptable losses. By dawn of June 21st, the gravity of their situation became crystal clear. This was no mere riot or local disturbance. The Boxer Rebellion had the backing of Empress Dowager Cixi herself, effectively making this a war between the Chinese Empire and the foreign powers. Captain Myers gathered his exhausted Marines around him, their faces blackened with gunpowder and etched with the strain of continuous combat. He spoke quietly, but firmly, his words carrying across the compound to boost the morale of international defenders who looked to American leadership in this darkest hour. The sound of distant artillery reminded everyone that somewhere beyond the walls of Peking, the great powers were mobilizing their military might. But would help arrive in time, or would the foreign legations become tombs for those who had dared to bring Western influence to the Middle Kingdom? President William McKinley paced the floors of the White House War Room as reports filtered in from his cabinet members throughout the morning of June 22, 1900. Secretary of War Elihu Root spread maps of northern China across the mahogany table, while Secretary of the Navy John Davis Long pointed to the port city of Tientsin, where American naval forces were already engaged in fierce fighting. The president faced a decision that would define American foreign policy for generations to come. Admiral Lewis Kempf commanded the American Asiatic Squadron from his flagship USS Newark, anchored in the muddy waters of the Pei River near Taku Forts. The 62-year-old naval veteran had served with distinction in the Civil War and now found himself coordinating with 7 other foreign navies in an unprecedented international operation. The multinational fleet included British, Russian, German, French, Italian, Austrian, and Japanese warships, each nation contributing what forces they could spare for the relief expedition. Major General Adna Chaffee, a grizzled Civil War veteran and Indian Wars fighter, received urgent orders to assemble the China Relief Expedition from available Army units in the Philippines. The 50-year-old commander had earned his reputation fighting Apache warriors in the American Southwest, but now faced an entirely different kind of warfare against an enemy fighting for their homelands. Survival. Chaffee understood that this expedition would require not just military prowess, but diplomatic finesse to work effectively with Allied forces. The first international relief column had already failed spectacularly. On June 10th, a hastily assembled force of 2,000 men, including 112 Americans, had attempted to fight their way from Shenzhen to Peking. Commander Bowman McCalla led the American contingent, but the international column met fierce resistance from well-organized Chinese imperial troops and Boxer irregulars. After 16 days of brutal fighting, the expedition was forced to retreat back to Tientsin, leaving the legations to face their fate alone. Back in the besieged compound, Captain Myers received devastating news through coded signals flashed from the Tartar Wall. The Chinese Imperial Army had formally joined the Boxer uprising, transforming what had been an irregular insurgency into a full-scale war between China and the foreign powers. This development meant the defenders now faced not only fanatical Boxer militants, but also disciplined troops armed with modern German Mauser rifles and supported by artillery. Private Daly found himself assigned to the most dangerous position in the American sector, a forward outpost on the ancient Tartar Wall that surrounded the Forbidden City. This massive stone fortification, built centuries earlier to protect China's emperors, now served as both a defensive position and a death trap for the young Marine. From his exposed position, Daly could observe Chinese troop movements while providing early warning of impending attacks. The assignment was essentially a suicide mission, but someone had to hold this crucial observation post. The international nature of the defense created both advantages and complications, while the combined firepower of 8 nations' military units provided substantial defensive capability. Language barriers and conflicting tactical doctrines often hindered coordination. British Colonel Claude MacDonald, the senior diplomat in charge of the defense, struggled to maintain unity among forces that had been enemies in previous conflicts. Russian Cossacks distrusted Japanese infantry, while German Marines questioned American tactical decisions. As July began, the siege entered its most brutal phase. Chinese artillery bombardment increased in intensity and accuracy, while Boxer tunnel warfare threatened to undermine the defensive perimeter. The defenders discovered that their enemies were digging elaborate tunnel systems designed to place explosive charges beneath key strongpoints. Counter-tunneling operations became a deadly underground war fought with bayonets and pistols in cramped, dark passages beneath the legation compound. Supply shortages reached critical levels as the siege stretched beyond anyone's expectations. Food rationing became so severe that horse meat became a luxury, while ammunition conservation required defenders to hold their fire until enemies reached point-blank range. Medical supplies dwindled to almost nothing, forcing doctors to perform surgery without anesthesia and treat infected wounds with makeshift bandages torn from diplomatic correspondence and formal dress uniforms. The night of July 15, 1900, would be forever etched in the annals of American military heroism. Private Daniel Daly crouched behind the crumbling stonework of the Tartar Wall as Chinese war drums thundered in the darkness beyond. Intelligence reports suggested that tonight's assault would be the largest yet attempted, with possibly 200 Boxer fighters and Imperial soldiers massing for a coordinated attack on the American position. According to U.S. Navy historical records, on the night of July 15, 1900, U.S. Marine Private Dan Daly single-handedly defended his position on the Tartar Wall from as many as 200 Chinese attackers, a feat that would earn him his first Medal of Honor. The 27-year-old Marine from Long Island had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in the entire legation defense, knowing full well that his isolated position offered little hope of survival if overrun. Captain Myers had positioned Daly's outpost at a critical bend in the ancient wall, where Chinese forces could potentially break through and outflank the main American defensive line. The position commanded excellent fields of fire across the approaches to the legation quarter, but it was also completely exposed to enemy attack from 3 sides. Daly's orders were simple: hold the position at all costs and provide early warning of any major Chinese assault. As midnight approached, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed off the ancient stones. Daly peered through the darkness and saw dozens of shadowy figures moving along the wall toward his position. Chinese soldiers, their faces painted with traditional war colors, advanced with the confidence of overwhelming numbers. Behind them came Boxer militants carrying ceremonial swords and modern rifles, their red headbands visible even in the moonlight. The young Marine waited until the lead attackers were within 50 yards before opening fire with his Springfield rifle. His first shot dropped a Chinese officer, causing momentary confusion in the attacking ranks. Daly worked his bolt-action rifle with mechanical precision, each shot carefully aimed to maximize casualties among the advancing enemy. The Chinese forces quickly recovered from their initial surprise and began returning fire, while continuing their advance. What followed was 4 hours of continuous combat that tested every aspect of Daly's training and courage. Wave after wave of Chinese attackers charged his position, forcing the Marine to fight with rifle, pistol, and bayonet in desperate hand-to-hand combat. Several times, Chinese soldiers actually reached his defensive position, only to be driven back by Daly's ferocious resistance. Bodies piled up around the American outpost as the night wore on. During the most critical moment of the battle, Daly's rifle ammunition ran out just as a group of boxer swordsmen reached the top of the wall. The Marine drew his Colt revolver and fought at point-blank range, using the ancient stonework as cover while engaging multiple enemies simultaneously. When his pistol ammunition was exhausted, Daly fixed his bayonet and prepared for what seemed like certain death. As more Chinese fighters swarmed toward his position, reinforcements arrived just as Daly's situation became hopeless. Captain Myers had heard the intensity of gunfire from the wall position and organized a relief party of 12 Marines to fight their way to Daly's aid. The rescue force engaged Chinese attackers from behind, creating enough confusion to allow Daly to hold his position until dawn broke over the ancient city. When morning light revealed the aftermath of the night's fighting, more than 50 Chinese bodies lay scattered around Daly's outpost. The young Marine had single-handedly held a position that was crucial to the overall defense of the American sector. His heroic stand became an inspiration to defenders throughout the international compound and demonstrated that individual courage could make the difference between survival and annihilation. The successful defense of the Tartar wall position proved that the international forces, despite their desperate circumstances, retained the fighting spirit necessary to continue their resistance. Captain Myers cited Daly's actions in his daily report to Admiral Kempf, noting that such extraordinary heroism under impossible conditions exemplified the finest traditions of American military service. The battle also proved that Chinese forces, despite their numerical advantage, could be defeated by disciplined firepower and determined resistance. Major General Abner Chaffee stood on the deck of the transport ship USS Logan as the American relief expedition approached the Chinese coast in early August 1900. The veteran commander surveyed his force of 4,900 soldiers and Marines, knowing that this might be the last chance to save the besieged foreigners in Peking. Intelligence reports from the few messages that had gotten through suggested the legation defenders were approaching the limits of human endurance. The international community had finally overcome political differences to mount a massive relief operation. 8 nations contributed forces to what became known as the 8-Nation Alliance. The United States, Britain, Russia, Germany, France, Italy, Austria-Hungary, and Japan. Each nation brought different military capabilities and tactical doctrines, creating both opportunities and complications for the overall command structure. General Chaffee found himself working closely with British General Alfred Gassely, Russian General Nikolai Linovich, and Japanese General Yamaguchi Motomi. Historical records from the U.S. Navy indicate that the Allied powers assembled a force of 20,000 men that departed Tientsin on August 5, 1900, including 1,000 Americans, over 500 of whom were U.S. Navy sailors and Marines. This multinational army represented the largest international military cooperation since the Napoleonic Wars, with former enemies now fighting side by side against a common threat. The logistical challenges of coordinating such a diverse force were enormous. Language barriers required extensive use of interpreters, while different national approaches to military discipline created friction among Allied units. American forces emphasized individual initiative and marksmanship, while German troops preferred rigid formation fighting. Russian units brought devastating artillery capabilities, but required massive supply trains, and Japanese forces contributed excellent intelligence gathering and rapid movement capabilities. Admiral Edward Seymour, the British naval commander who had led the failed First Relief Expedition, provided crucial intelligence about Chinese defensive capabilities and troop movements. His earlier defeat had been costly but educational, revealing that Chinese imperial forces were far better equipped and organized than Western military planners had anticipated. The Chinese army possessed modern German artillery, disciplined infantry formations, and extensive knowledge of local terrain that gave them significant advantages over foreign invaders. General Chaffee established his command post at Tientsin, the key port city that served as the jumping-off point for all relief operations. The American sector of the city had been under siege for weeks, With Chinese forces controlling most of the surrounding countryside, supply convoys from the coast came under constant attack from Boxer guerrillas, who had perfected hit-and-run tactics against foreign logistics operations. The multinational force faced its first major test at the Battle of Yangtze on August 5, 1900. Chinese imperial troops, supported by Boxer regulars, had established strong defensive positions along the Pei River to prevent foreign relief forces from advancing toward Peking. The Chinese position included modern artillery pieces positioned on high ground that commanded the only practical route of advance. American artillery under Colonel Emerson Liscombe opened the battle with a devastating barrage that silenced several Chinese gun positions. However, the attack quickly bogged down when Chinese defenders proved more resilient than expected. Liscombe himself was mortally wounded while leading his men forward, becoming one of the highest-ranking American casualties of the entire campaign. His death galvanized American forces and demonstrated the serious nature of Chinese resistance. The battle lasted a full days before Allied forces finally broke through Chinese defensive lines. Japanese infantry proved particularly effective in flanking maneuvers, while British artillery provided sustained fire support that gradually wore down enemy positions. American Marines distinguished themselves in close-quarters fighting when Chinese troops attempted counterattacks designed to recapture lost positions. Victory at Yangtze opened the road to Peking, but came at a significant cost. Allied casualties numbered in the hundreds, while Chinese losses were estimated at over 1,000 killed and wounded. More importantly, the battle demonstrated that the relief expedition faced a determined enemy that would contest every mile of the advance toward the besieged legations. Time was running out for the trapped defenders, and every day of delay could mean the difference between rescue and massacre. The Allied relief force resumed its march toward Peking on August 10, 1900, with General Chaffee's American contingent forming the right flank of the international column. The oppressive summer heat and humidity made every step a test of endurance, while constant harassment from Boxer guerrillas turned the advance into a running battle. Intelligence reports filtering back from Peking grew increasingly desperate. The latest coded message, transmitted through Chinese sympathizers at great personal risk, indicated that the legation defenders had perhaps only days of ammunition remaining. Food supplies had been exhausted weeks earlier, forcing defenders to subsist on horse meat, leather, and whatever edible vegetation could be found within the compound walls. Medical supplies were completely gone, leaving doctors to treat wounded with nothing more than torn clothing and boiled water. Captain Myers continued to hold the American sector with his dwindling force of Marines and sailors. Several of his men had been killed or wounded in daily fighting, while others were so weakened by malnutrition and dysentery that they could barely hold their rifles. Private Daly remained at his position on the Tartar Wall, now recognized by all defenders as the most dangerous assignment in the entire compound. His continued survival had become a symbol of hope for the international garrison. The Chinese strategy had evolved from direct assault to siege warfare, designed to starve the foreigners into submission. Empress Dowager Cixi had apparently decided that capturing the legations intact would provide more propaganda value than simply destroying them. This decision may have saved the defenders' lives, as Chinese forces possessed sufficient artillery to level the entire foreign quarter. If they had chosen to do so, General Chaffee faced his own strategic dilemmas as the relief column advanced. Moving to quickly risk walking into prepared ambushes, while moving to slowly might arrive to find only corpses in the legation compound. The international nature of his command created additional complications, as different national contingents had varying opinions about acceptable casualty rates and tactical approaches. The Battle of Peking on August 12 proved to be the largest engagement of the entire relief expedition. Chinese imperial forces, reinforced by thousands of Boxer fighters, had established a major defensive line designed to prevent foreign forces from reaching Peking. The Chinese position included modern artillery, expertly constructed earthworks, and natural terrain advantages that multiplied their defensive capabilities. American forces approached the Chinese position at dawn, with Chaffee personally leading the reconnaissance that identified enemy strengths and weaknesses. The Chinese had positioned their artillery on reverse slopes that protected the guns from direct fire while still allowing them to engage advancing Allied forces. Boxer fighters occupied forward positions designed to channel attacking forces into killing zones, covered by Imperial Army riflemen. The battle opened with the largest artillery barrage of the entire campaign. Allied guns, including American field artillery pieces and British naval guns brought inland from the fleet, pounded Chinese positions for 2 hours before infantry attacks began. The bombardment proved less effective than hoped. as Chinese defenders had constructed deep bunkers that provided protection from indirect fire. Infantry assaults began simultaneously along the entire Allied front. American forces, supported by Japanese units on their left flank, advanced against the strongest part of the Chinese position. The attack immediately came under intense fire from concealed positions, forcing American troops to advance by rushes between whatever cover they could find. Colonel Aaron Daggett led his regiment in a frontal assault that gradually pushed Chinese defenders back from their forward positions. The turning point came when British forces succeeded in capturing Chinese artillery positions on the left side of the battlefield. This breakthrough allowed Allied forces to turn captured guns against remaining Chinese positions, creating a cascading collapse of the entire defensive line. Chinese forces began withdrawing toward Peking in good order, but their final major defensive position had been broken. Victory at Peking opened the direct route to Peking, but Allied casualties had been severe. American losses included dozens of dead and wounded, while the international force as a whole had suffered hundreds of casualties. However, the road to the capital now lay open, and advanced scouts reported that Chinese defensive works around Peking itself appeared to be lighter than expected. On the morning of August 14, 1900, the advanced elements of the International Relief Force finally came within sight of Peking's ancient walls. General Chaffee deployed his American forces to assault the Tongbin Gate, one of several entrance points that would need to be captured simultaneously if the relief operation was to succeed. The massive stone walls of the Chinese capital rose before the Allied armies like monuments to imperial power, but they also represented the final obstacle between the relief force and the trapped legations. According to historical records, the Battle of Peking was fought on August 14 through 15, 1900, when the Eight-Nation Alliance relieved the siege of the Peking legation quarter during the Boxer Rebellion. The operation required precise coordination among forces that had been fighting together for less than 2 weeks while advancing through hostile territory under constant enemy harassment. Chinese defensive preparations around Peking were extensive but showed signs of hasty construction. Imperial Army engineers had reinforced the ancient walls with modern earthworks and positioned artillery to cover the main approaches. However, the defenders were spread thin across the city's enormous perimeter, and many of the best Chinese troops had been committed to the failed defense at Peking. 2 days earlier, the American assault began at dawn with artillery preparation designed to breach the walls. Near Tongbin Gate, Colonel Daggett's infantry regiment took position in assault formation, while Marine detachments prepared to exploit any breakthrough. Private Daly, now recognized throughout the expedition as a symbol of American fighting spirit, volunteered for the most dangerous assignment, leading the first assault party through whatever gap American artillery could create in the ancient walls. Coordination among Allied forces proved challenging as each national contingent approached their assigned objectives. Russian forces attacked the northern walls, while British and German troops assaulted gates on the eastern side of the city. Japanese forces, moving with characteristic speed and precision, advanced against southern approaches, while French and Italian contingents provided reserves for exploitation of any breakthrough. The artillery bombardment proved less effective than hoped against walls that had been built to withstand medieval siege warfare. American field guns made some impact, but the ancient stonework absorbed punishment that would have destroyed modern fortifications. Colonel Daggett realized that his infantry would need to assault positions that remained largely intact, making the attack far more costly than originally planned. As American troops approached Tongbin Gate, Chinese defenders opened fire from concealed positions along the walls. The attackers found themselves caught in crossfire from multiple directions, while attempting to advance across open ground that provided minimal cover. Several American soldiers fell in the first minutes of the assault, but the attack continued with disciplined fire and movement that gradually suppressed Chinese defensive positions. Private Daly led his assault party in a desperate charge across the final 100 yards. To the gate itself, Chinese defenders threw hand grenades and fired rifles from point-blank range, but the American Marines pressed forward with bayonets fixed and fighting spirit that overcame numerical disadvantage. Daly personally engaged several Chinese soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, while his men placed explosive charges against the ancient wooden gates. The explosion that destroyed Tongbin Gate marked the beginning of the end for Chinese resistance in Peking. American forces poured through the breach while other Allied contingents achieved similar breakthroughs at their assigned objectives. Fighting through the streets of Peking proved to be a complex urban warfare challenge that tested American tactical doctrine. Chinese snipers occupied buildings throughout the city, while Boxer fighters used their intimate knowledge of local terrain to stage ambushes and conduct hit-and-run attacks. American forces had to clear buildings room by room while maintaining momentum toward the legation quarter. The sound of gunfire from the direction of the foreign legations indicated that the siege was still active. Chinese forces continued their attacks on the compound even as Allied relief forces fought through the city toward them. This suggested that the defenders might be in their final hours, making speed more important than tactical caution in the American advance through Peking's narrow streets. The first American troops to reach the besieged legation compound arrived at approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon of August 14, 1900. Captain Myers, now gaunt and exhausted after 55 days of continuous siege, could hardly believe his eyes as Marines in dusty blue uniforms appeared at the compound gates. The sound of American voices shouting orders and encouragement brought tears to the eyes of defenders who had given up hope of rescue just hours earlier. Contemporary accounts from August 18, 1900, record that American missionaries who survived the siege expressed hearty appreciation of the courage, fidelity, and patriotism of the American Marines, to whom we so largely owe our salvation. The relief of the international legations represented one of the most successful rescue operations in military history, saving over 3,000 foreign civilians and Chinese Christians from what appeared to be certain death. Private Daly's survival of the siege became legendary throughout the American forces. The young Marine had held his position on the Tartar wall for nearly 2 months, enduring constant combat while serving as an inspiration to defenders throughout the compound. His heroic actions during the night battle of July 15th had already been reported to higher command, but his overall performance during the entire siege established him as one of the most decorated enlisted men in American military history. The immediate aftermath of the relief operation revealed the full extent of the defenders' ordeal. Ammunition supplies had been reduced to fewer than 10 rounds per man, while food stores contained only enough rice for perhaps 2 more days. Medical conditions in the compound were appalling, with dozens of wounded men lying on makeshift stretchers without proper medical care. The defenders had literally been saved in their final hours. Chinese resistance within Peking collapsed rapidly once the legation quarter had been secured. Empress Dowager Cixi fled the capital with her court, effectively abandoning the city to international occupation. The Battle of Peking was over, but the broader Boxer rebellion would continue for several more months. Historical records indicate that a multinational parade was held in Peking on August 28, 1900, to celebrate the Allied victory, though the formal peace treaty would not be concluded until much later. This ceremony marked the first time in modern history that American forces had participated in an international military occupation of a foreign capital. General Chaffee established his headquarters in the Forbidden City itself, making the American expedition part of the broader international occupation of northern China. This occupation would last for over a year while diplomats negotiated the final peace settlement. American forces found themselves serving as peacekeepers in a complex situation that involved multiple competing interests among the Allied powers. The China Relief Expedition established important precedents for American military operations in the 20th century. President McKinley's decision to deploy forces without formal congressional declaration of war created new executive powers that would be used by future presidents in similar situations. The successful cooperation with international allies demonstrated American capability to participate in multinational military operations. Private Daly received the Medal of Honor for his actions during the siege, becoming one of only 2 Marines to earn America's highest military decoration twice during his career. Captain Myers was promoted and cited for his outstanding leadership during the siege. The entire American contingent received official recognition for their role in one of the most successful rescue operations in military history. The long-term consequences of the Boxer Rebellion and its suppression fundamentally changed the balance of power in East Asia. The Qing dynasty never recovered from the humiliation of foreign occupation, while the demonstrated effectiveness of international military cooperation encouraged similar operations in future conflicts. American participation established the United States as a major Pacific power with interests that would shape foreign policy for generations to come. The relief of Peking in 1900 became a defining moment in American military history, demonstrating that individual courage and international cooperation could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The heroism of men like Private Daniel Daly and the leadership of officers like Captain Myers and General Chaffee established traditions that would inspire American forces through to world wars and beyond.